Hello, Atmore. It's the Lloyd and Friends Show. And now here's your host, Lloyd Alberton.
Good morning. This is Lloyd Albritton, and I'm broadcasting to you from WGYJ-LP 93.5 FM on your radio dial. And this morning I'm talking with my special guest, Miss Bonnie Bartell Latino. You use the Bartell Latino now,
I
don't
do.
you?
I started doing that when I was writing for Stars and Stripes so that people from Atmore, if they were in the military, they would know who it was. That's
Okay.
the main reason that I did it.
Okay. Bonnie is a fellow writer, so we've kind of had a camaraderie over our writing, shared our thoughts and ideas. And we'll talk a little bit about her writing. But Bonnie is also an Atmore stalwart or
A native.
A native. She's a native. Well, she's actually more than a native. Her family owned a family business here. Most of the old timers here. In fact, my wife still talks about how her grandma out they used to butcher a cow and take it up to Bartell's, and you had lockers up there, didn't you?
He did.
They would put the meat away and stuff like
Sausage. He was really known for sausage.
that. Was he? Okay.
I was at AC Moore one day. No, I'm sorry, it was Rachel Patterson, and just sitting at a long table with teachers and friends that had come there for the day, and one of them said, gosh, they had sausage that day at the lunchroom, and one of the teachers said, I'd give anything to have some of Mr. Bartell's sausage. And I looked over at her and I said, did you say that just because I'm here? And she said, Bonnie, she said, I didn't even know you were here. I just loved his sausage. And I said, well, you weren't alone, but Conecuh sausage is not a bad second. At least I think so.
But yours was better?
It was similar. It was very similar.
Was it?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, he did other things. He brought a cow in, you could get whatever cuts you wanted, but people just adored his sausage.
Well, what was your business model? Did you have a retail front, or did you just butcher and store meat for people that brought in their own meat? What was the
He sold meat
model?
to whoever wanted it. People came from Mississippi and North Florida and all over. He had wonderful steaks, and but William Grissett, who died a few years, most people know
Right.
who
I know
William and
William.
Mary
I
Grissett
remember.
were. William told me how much my daddy's not too long before he died, that he was so thankful for my daddy's the locker plant part of it, where you could rent a locker to freeze if you brought in a cow and you wanted to freeze it, or you shot a deer. And William said his family didn't have a freezer, I guess. And he said, that was kind of our lifeline. And I said, well, apparently it was for a lot of people that also didn't have freezers, Back, he started his business in the 40s. They moved here in 45. And it just grew into until it got so that the federal government just put so many restrictions. He said, and he was 70 years old, and he just had to sell it because there were just so many restrictions. But he could have gone on forever doing that. He loved it, and there were so many people there. I used to go to cattle auctions with him across the street on Tuesdays,
I remember that old cell pen being right in there. Yeah.
and he'd buy his cows and pigs. And a man that worked for him, a Mr. Finley, had a farm in Canoe, and they would keep the cattle that he bought until they fattened them up enough that they could make some bacon and make some steaks. They had a nice life in Canoe.
Yeah. Well, did he start that as a young man, and he just did that was his whole life, or did he do it later?
I'm trying to think. He must have been in his early 40s. They came here from Pensacola. In fact, my sister Amy, who a lot of people know, she was ECHS class of 58, was born in Pensacola. And he was working for Cuddy Hay Meatpacking Division. And so they moved here after the war. And Bayard Swift was very instrumental in him coming here and settling in Atmore. They had a little family store in Pensacola, a neighborhood store. and it was doing well, but he wanted to get his children into a small town where they could have, feel connected to people and know who people were. And Bayard Swift and the Episcopal Church just welcomed. My mother was Episcopalian. My father had been Catholic, and she convinced him if they were going to be married, she was going to raise her children as Episcopalians. So that's how they met Bayard Swift. And the Swifts, just with open arms. Bayard's mother I have pictures of me at my first Christmas sitting under the Christmas tree with my parents. And I knew it wasn't our house. And my sister said, "Oh, no, that was Miss Anna Swift. That was where you had your first Christmas Eve. And after your christening in March of 1948, she had a luncheon for you." So Daddy became an Episcopalian, and he became a really, devoted one, and went out to Porch a lot and did help the minister with the liturgy and that sort of thing. And I later did the same thing at Trinity. So it's, how could I not come back to Atmore? People say, "Why did you come back to Atmore? You were in Hawaii."
Well, I heard you say something interesting, because you said your father was Catholic to start with, and your mother was Episcopalian,
yes.
correct? Mm-hmm. And you are Episcopalian,
Yes.
and I know your husband Tom, he's Catholic.
He is. And maybe that's why
maybe
God
you get him converted
did not give us children, because it would have been a problem. It would have been a problem. He is devoted. He is, you can ask any Catholic, and I mean, he's devoted to that church. He'll never leave me for another woman, but he might leave me for the church. He's just about left me for the church.
Well, your sister and your brother-in-law are kind of the same situation. I mean, Betty, she's Episcopalian,
She is.
I think.
And Floyd is
And Floyd is Baptist.
very Baptist.
Yeah.
And
But they find a way to make it work. That's great.
and my sister Amy's husband was Presbyterian, and he changed, and he sings in the choir, and he does everything. This is in Texas. This is Amy and Dwight. And you mentioned Betty and Floyd Adams, and of course he was a coach here for years and years, and they were a second marriage, sort of in early middle age, and they are just devoted to each other, and they are like a comedy routine. Betty is just crazy, and he's her straight man. And everybody knows Coach Adams. We used to go to Pensacola a lot. We could not go to Pensacola with them without at least 3 young men or older men coming up saying, "Coach," I think it's wonderful when you're a coach that's really devoted to your players, and they remember that. They still have him once a year. They do a little party down at I think it's called Smokey's Barbecue on the highway, and they have Floyd and Betty, and sometimes my husband drives them down there, and he goes, and it's all on the house because one of his players owns it, and so they come from all around here to see him.
Well, I know that Floyd is good buddies with Carl Madison.
He is.
And Carl is also one of those legendary high school coaches from the area. I had Carl in the 7th grade, and then he moved on to bigger things.
Yes. They recently took him out of the assisted living he's in for the day, and they took him down to see Ted Clayton in, I think they live in Fairhope, and they said Carl walked in, and he took one look at
Clayton?
Yes, Mr. Clayton. And they're the same age. And he said, "Boy, you got old."
I know exactly how he feels.
So do I.
I look around. I go to funerals more than anywhere else nowadays, and I kind of kid with my wife, "Who are these old people?" Well, you went to like 3rd grade with them? That's who they are.
Somebody went to a reunion, and they were like mid 60s. And they said, "What is so-and-so's mother doing here?" And they said, "That is so-and-so."
That's not the mother. Well, now, your family moved here from Pensacola. And how
But
old
they're
were
both originally from Louisiana.
Originally from Louisiana. Okay. Now, how old were you when you first came to Atmore?
I was born here.
You was born in Atmore after they moved here?
Yes, I'm the only
I see. Okay.
Bartell that was born here.
Okay. So your roots go all the way back just to Atmore.
They do. I think
Got it.
Emily Wood Mims, I don't think she uses Biggs as her known name. People know her as Emily Mims. She and I were christened at the same time. Our birthdays are very close together. So in that little church on Kearney Street, the Trinity Episcopal. So deep roots.
Well, my wife used to go over there, and when we first got married, she was
Yes,
going
I
there, and I
remember
wasn't
that.
going to church. I'm Mormon,
Yes.
and I had been inactive in the church for a long time, and so I used to go over
We
there
we
with
had
her.
hoped you would stay, but you know.
Well, it was delightful, and I loved everybody there. You know how it is when your roots. It's sort of like some religions, Catholic, Episcopal. I think in a lot of Protestant religions, you could be comfortable in most one or the other. You could go from Baptist to maybe Methodist or something. But there are some that you just can't get away from. If you're a Mennonite, for example, you always got a little bit of that in your blood,
Right.
and I'm the same way with my. And Gwen, she asked me, she said I would go, but I wouldn't take the sacrament. And she said, "Well," I said, "Well, I just don't feel right because even though I've steered away from, I still believe it, and I don't feel right taking it." So she said, "Well, look, I think we need to be on the same page." And I would be willing to investigate your church if you would. And so I said, well, I've done so many bad things. You don't know exactly how the Mormon church works. I've got to confess. I've got to go talk to the bishop about all the bad things I've done. And they're liable to throw me right back out before I get there. But we worked through that, and it was a good thing for us. And it's been, I think, a positive thing to have a common faith where we can talk about things of the same. But you and Tom probably do that as well.
Yes.
Because you have the basic fundamental Christian concept.
Well, I'll tell you how deep roots go with the Catholics. My father was raised Catholic in South Louisiana, and I think he was maybe about 20 something when he and mother got married, and she just told him, you can have me or you can have the Catholic Church. And he chose, and I'm really surprised that he did. However, I never saw that his devotion. I knew that he really revered the Virgin Mary because the Catholic faith really does that a lot. But we didn't. He was a great Episcopalian. He was probably one of the best Episcopalians that ever went there as far as tithing with his time. And but when our mother died, we had a Holy Communion service just for the family before everybody else came. And we knelt down to say our prayers before the service started. And Daddy was between Amy and myself. And he started saying, Hail Mary, full of grace.
Full of grace.
Yes. He was saying the rosary. He didn't even know he was saying it out loud. But in his darkest hour, he reached out to what had comforted him most in childhood, and that was the Catholic faith.
How about that?
And I did a double take. I loved it. I mean, at first I was shocked, but I knew why, because I knew the history, because they were always very open about it. But maybe that's the most interesting thing about me, that I love that about my daddy, or I loved it.
Yeah. Well, so you went to school here, and you started elementary
did.
school right here in Hamlet. Where'd you go to elementary?
Rachel Patterson.
Rachel Patterson, and then you went to the middle school. Or it was a junior high then, wasn't it? Over here where the chamber used to be.
Exactly.
That
The
was
old
still-
Y building. That was
the
our
old Y
junior high.
building.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was still open up in the 60s. I'm
Yeah,
not sure when
I
they.
think we were one of the last classes that went through. I think the new school, I still call ECHS
That's a charming school,
new
by the way. I
school.
love
It
the
is.
look of that
It
building.
was
It
wonderful.
just looks like a school.
Yeah.
Ought to look,
Yeah. And we would gather before school out in front of it, when the weather wasn't bad, and you would kind of, if you were dating, you'd be with a bunch of girls, it was just fun. It was
Now,
just
was it a middle school then, or was it a high school? Because it was a high school.
just junior high.
It was just junior high.
It was 7th, 8th, and 9th grade.
But before that, it was the high school, wasn't it?
Yes. In fact, both my sisters went there when it was the high school.
Okay. What's the fellow's name that used to be the
The principal,
renowned principal of? Was it Hodnett?
Mr. Hodnett, and that
Mr. Hodnett.
was before my time. And his sister, it was also very, very revered, and she was Miss Hodnett. I can't recall her first name, but she taught senior English, and she was very, very good. There were some colleges, if you had Miss Hodnett, in senior English in high school, you didn't have to take freshman college English.
Really?
She was really
So good.
so good and so well renowned, and she taught English literature, taught a lot, of English things. And I did not have her. I had Albert Kennington, who was wonderful. But when Miss Hodnett retired, the class that was going out with her collected funds enough to send her on a trip to England. And before she could go, she had never been. Before she could go, she was killed in a horrible car wreck, I think in 1966. So just a real tragic life. She never married. Her students were her life. And I guess God decided that she'd had enough of those kids at ECHS. She could come on up and teach some classes in heaven.
I'll tell you what, I know we have some wonderful teachers today as well, but those old teachers back in those days were really dedicated to teaching. They looked like teachers. Most of them had that chain on their glasses. They just looked like teachers, and that was their life. And they didn't make much money in those days.
No, and the women made 30% less. If you came in as a new teacher right out of college and you were male, and there was a woman teaching the same subject, and she had been there 25 years, you were making 30% more than she was.
And you were probably only making $3,500 a year or something like that.
I did not know that at the time. People that knew that were teachers' kids knew it, especially if their mother was a teacher.
Right. Well, I know I had some wonderful teachers down at Ernest Ward where I went,
Yes.
and they had a lot of influence on my life. I think that's a good profession. If I could go back and redo my life, back when I was in high school, the only reason I could see for going to college was to be a teacher. The only people that had a college degree that I knew were teachers. And I didn't think I wanted to be a teacher, so I delayed. I went to college later, but I didn't go right out of school like I should have and got it done right. But I should have done that. As I look back, the thing that I enjoy doing most today is teaching, whether it be in church
you teach
or
psychology.
I
don't
teach
you?
psychology. I teach psychology at the community college, but as an adjunct. I didn't go into it earlier. I wish I had, because that would have been a wonderful career. Because even in the last, since I moved back here, back in 2011 when I started teaching at the college, even then the students stopped me all the time. And just from substitute teaching over the years over here, they stop me still all the time and remember me. And I said, wouldn't it have been wonderful if I had spent my entire career teaching?
Yeah.
And one of my good friends, John Paget, you probably know John Paget. He taught for years at Ernest Ward.
I know the name.
And he taught at Faulkner. And he still wants to know how he'll call me. If there's a funeral or anything, he still knows all of it. He keeps up with all of his students.
That's great. The teacher that's left from the times that I was at ECHS, there too, Juanita Smith, who you may know or you may have heard of her. Her grandson is Trey Smith,
right?
Who was quite a phenomenon when he was in Atmore. He's a lawyer in Washington, D.C. now and just got engaged. He's kind of like my adopted godson. But Juanita is one that she did all the extracurricular activities. She was in charge of, she did the plays, and she was in charge of like Miss Atmore contests and all that kind of thing. And she's health-wise, she's not doing well at all. And Albert Kennington, of course, he replaced Miss Hodnett. And it's so sad to me that, those are two. Charlotte Boyle is someone also that gets invited to our reunions because she taught some of us in 6th grade when she was Charlotte Yarborough. And we revere our teachers. And
one of my favorites, you probably know Jean Webb. Do you know Jean Webb? She taught and retired. She was later assistant principal at Ernest Ward.
I don't.
But she's 97 now, and we've written letters since we got out of school back and forth for the years.
Would we know her in Atmore?
You
Is
do.
Letha?
No.
She's got a daughter named
She has a
Letha.
daughter named Letha.
Okay, same thing.
Yes.
Okay.
She was married to Judge Webb. They lived out in Canoe.
Yes.
He was well known,
Yeah.
judge.
I just did a huge spread for Atmore News, and it was on TV in Channel 5 about the 1961 All-Stars baseball, senior Little League, that went to the World Series.
Yeah, I read that. I read.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, Ricky Webb was the instigator of that. They called and asked me if I would write it, and they weren't together. They didn't have phone numbers for each other. They hadn't seen each other in 60 years. And so I took it on, but Ricky was the instigator, and it turned into a reunion. So that's Ricky Webb is in California, and that's her son, and he
That's her
talks
son.
about his mama all the time.
Okay. Well, her youngest son is named Peller, and he lives with her and takes care of her now.
Okay, that's true. Yes,
I
Ricky
wrote
told
her-
me that.
We had a class reunion, and I wrote her a letter. I knew she wouldn't be able to come. She lives up in Montgomery area.
Yes.
And she called me, and we had a nice conversation. She said, "I'm old now. I'm blind. I can't see."
But she's
I
still
can't
real
remember."
sharp.
She's very sharp, very witty, like she always was. And at the end of the conversation, it was really comical. She said, "Now, she always called us to Mister. Now, Mr. Albritton." She said, "Now, Mr. Albritton, I want to tell you this. Since I was your teacher, and I still am, I want to give you some instructions. Now, I want you to remember, don't forget to say your prayers." And she said, "And don't forget to brush your teeth, because you're going to need them when you get my age."
They were
but she was-
our
she was
backdoor
funny.
neighbors, and I remember her as a young woman. And at that time, they only had 2 children. Letha was in high school, and Ricky was probably middle school age, and then I was elementary school age. And we played together all the time. They didn't care about the age. Letha didn't play with us because she was in high school, but I knew who she was, and she would come over and she'd visit. And yeah, Ms. Webb is a delight. I haven't seen her in years, but Ricky has told me many things about his mother, and
She's a character.
yeah,
She
that's
really is
that's
a
what
character.
Ricky says. Rick, he goes by Rick, not Ricky
He
anymore.
goes by Rick now. Okay, let's get back to Bonnie. So you went to high school. Now, you graduated from high school in 66. Okay, I graduated in 65. I did not know you in those days, although us country boys used to come to Atmore to look for girls. And we'd usually end up, having fights with the Atmore boys. It was usually over the Atmore girls, And I'll never forget, we used to come up on Saturday night to the old record hop. I don't know if you ever went to any
Yep,
of those.
yep.
The old National Guard Army,
Yes.
they would have them.
Yeah.
John Dixon would come
Yes,
up
yep.
and have those record hops. And these Navy boys would come up from Pensacola. And in those days, they had to wear their uniform on Liberty. So they'd come up in their Navy suits, and boy, the girls just fell out for those uniforms. They would just come up and try to get our girls up here, our nice, pretty country girls. And there would be a fight every Saturday night. There'd be a sailor laying out in that flower bed. It was exciting times, and I remember it. It was a lot of fun.
My
And
sister,
some of those sailors got some of those girls,
Oh, they
by the way,
did.
too. Yeah.
my sister, she and her friends liked to go to Pensacola Beach a lot, and it was her birthday, and it was in April, so it was warm enough for bathing suits and all. And there were 3 pilots that walked up, and there were 3 of them. They were not pilots yet; they were in training. And this striking Marine, he wasn't in uniform. She didn't know at the time. I think she probably suspected because he didn't sound like he was from this area.
Probably by the haircut.
Yeah, that's true. And the first question he asked her was, "Are you a churchgoer?"
Really?
And she was smitten. He had like a 1957 red Chevy.
Oh,
and
boy.
I think he was Texas A&M class of 56. And yeah, they've been married over 60 years. They're having a big family party tonight in College Station, Texas. Their oldest son is 60 today. So
Well, now, how did you meet Tom? Where's he from?
he was from Pass Christian, Mississippi, born in a house in the French Quarter on Charter Street. A lot of Italians settled in that area, picking strawberries, the first Italians that came over. Tom's a second-generation American.
Okay.
And, the only Italians that we knew in Atmore were DeLassios, and they were friends of mine. And somebody said, when I moved back here, somebody said, "Was Tom a foreign exchange student? Did you meet him that way?" And I said, "No, he's from Mississippi, Louisiana." But he had hair down to here. I'm He had hair longer than mine. He was playing in a rock band, the rock band at Mississippi State, but he was also in college ROTC. So he'd swoop that hair up under a cap and go get his stipend for ROTC. And he was a senior at Mississippi State, and I was a freshman at Mississippi University for Women. It's Mississippi University for Women. And we had a blind date, and he really looked like he was a wild child, and he was playing in a rock band, and that was kind of what I was looking for.
Just what you were looking for.
I mean, I didn't know I wanted somebody that could sing Brown Eyed Girl and change the lyrics to Green Eyed Girl because of me. I mean, but that was just gravy. But I took him home to meet Daddy, Bill Bartell. For those of you who know, you can imagine he was just a little bit to the right of Archie Bunker about the men his daughters dated. But he said, do not bring this hippie communist back to this house until he gets his hair cut. Well, he got a haircut. He got a buzz clip because he went to Eglin for summer camp after he had one more semester. He was a first semester senior when I met him. So anyway, I said, Daddy, do you know that he's Catholic? He's Catholic? Boy, are you Catholic? He said, yes, sir, my whole life. And things got better then. And he ended up, Daddy adored all three of his sons-in-law. He felt like he lucked out with Floyd and Dwight and Tom.
Well, it sounds like you had a really good family environment to grow up in.
Very much so.
So going back to your high school, so you went to high school at the high school
At the new
that's
school.
there at the new school. We
Yeah.
call it the new school.
Yeah,
We had-
the one with Hodnett Auditorium,
Right.
named for the people we were just talking about.
We had an addition at Ernest Ward back in, it must have been 62 or something like that. We always called it the new building. If you had a class in the new building, it had air conditioning. The rest of the school didn't. But even until they tore the whole school down here recently, we always referred to it, my wife and I, as the new building.
Yeah, yeah.
It was like 50 years old or more.
Yeah. I mean, I still do.
The new school.
I still call it the new school.
Well, you were a cheerleader, weren't you? Seemed like I saw a picture of you somewhere in your cheerleader.
In
suit.
junior high.
That was in junior
for
high.
2 years. And
Okay.
then I got to high school, and I got into journalism, and I became editor of the school newspaper.
Okay.
I was also editor of the 6th grade newspaper at Rachel Patterson. So my first writing experience, and I don't know if this is the way you want to go with this, but my first writing experience, even before Pam Middleton and I wrote for the Alabama Advance, I was like 10. I would go around the neighborhood and collect gossip. And then I would go home and I would one finger type it. And then I would type the same page over and over again until my mother found out I was selling it for 10 cents a sheet.
Really?
Yeah.
You kind of remind me of an old Andy Griffith episode where Opie, did you ever see that episode?
I don't
Opie
think
was,
so.
Opie was gathering stories, and he was telling some stuff that some of the
Yeah,
people didn't
yeah,
want told.
yeah, that's what my
and
mother
He got
said.
in trouble.
Yeah. Mother said, you might think it's a cute story, but they might not like you telling it. I have told about Susan Moorhead, who's a great teacher, and she's taught here forever, about our attempts to win Miss Little League back in the 60s. And she just said, I just wanted a little crown. And I worked that into a story that's been on Facebook. It's been everywhere. But I'm not sure Susan is still as enchanted with that story as I am.
Well, where do you think that bug for writing came from? Is it something you
Big
got from
genetics. My mother was a journalism major in college and
Okay.
then went into teaching. I did not know that till she died, and I found her yearbook. And we were in Louisiana. Mother's family was from around out in the country on the bayou near Alexandria, Louisiana. And we were touring this. Really, it truly was a plantation home, and we were looking at some of our ancestors. My husband traced a lot of the ancestry, and the people that still lived there knew a lot of it. And they said, well, which one? There were 3 brothers from France who had a huge land grant from the King of Spain. And they married 3 French school teachers who came to this country to be governesses for the plantation owners. They met up in New Orleans and married. The three brothers married the three sisters. And so I said, which one is the one we're related to? And they showed me, and I'm writing things down that this woman's telling us and telling Tom to take a picture. I mean, I'm just the journalist, taking over here. Yeah. And the lady said, now he was a writer, and he was in the Louisiana House of Representatives, and but he was a well-known writer. And I just was floored because that had not shown up writing was not his profession, but he wrote, like I do for, freelance kind of stuff and mostly volunteer these days. But so that's a little bit of, I said, well, what happened to all this money? And they said, well, they gave land to the University of Texas for the school, for the College of Texas. And I said, well, if they had that kind of money, what happened? Because Mother's family was not super wealthy. They were comfortable.
Did she have one of those classic Louisiana names like Thibodeau or anything like that? What was her maiden name?
That would be more on my daddy's side.
Oh, okay.
She was Aimee French,
okay.
Andrews, because the French side, the three school teachers, and then my grandmother married a man, a Mr. Andrews, and his background was Scottish. In fact, I am named for my aunt who died in the last pandemic, like 1916 or so, and her name was Bonnie Andrews. She was like 8 or 9. And so that's who I was named for. And, you don't get much more Scottish than that. Mm-hmm. And when we traveled to Scotland, I really felt connected there. I felt real connected in Madrid, Spain, and I felt real connected in the Alsace region of France. And my French ancestors were not from that area, but I really felt a pull, and I really felt it in Madrid, although the three brothers from Spain were from North Spain. And they lost the big money gambling in Louisiana. Should I not say that? But that's not a hobby of mine. So
mine either. I'm too stingy to throw my money. Well, I enjoyed pulling the lever. I'll tell you a story. I worked for a company in Colorado some years ago, and there were about 100 employees. It was a manufacturing company, and everybody for our company Christmas party decided they wanted to have a gambling. The boss would give us $1,500 a piece, paper money, and they could go and gamble because they had all those mountain towns up there in Colorado that were turning over to gambling towns. And I never had played any kind of gambling games other than pulling a lever on a slot machine. But I got over to a table with my $1,500. And it was, what's the one where they spin? Roulette. It was roulette.
The reds and the blacks.
Mm-hmm. And somebody told me, now, I said, I can't lose my money. I keep playing these games and I keep making money. And they said, well, you'll lose it quick here. Just go over there and play that. And I said, well, I'm ready to visit around with people. I'm tired of this. So I went over to the roulette table. And I kept winning and winning and winning. I won like $300,000 at the roulette table. And these were, the table guys were real table, at the gambling casinos and all. And the guy said, I've never seen this before in my life. Too bad it wasn't real money.
Yeah.
It was play money. He said, I've never seen anybody with a winning streak like this. And then guess what? I lost it all. I kept going. Classic, huh?
Yeah.
And I lost it all. And, people were coming up to me like, hey, Lloyd, give me $100. Give me $200. I was handing out the money to all my friends. And when I run out of money, I said, boy, if I just had one more toss, one more, give me $100. Nobody had the money.
Yeah.
I said, well, I've learned a good lesson here.
That was clever.
Yeah, I learned a good moral lesson about gambling, so I never have done that again.
Yeah.
For real or play. Now, let's go. I told you we were going to run out of time, and we're going right along.
Okay.
Now, I want to ask you about, you married Tom Latino, mm-hmm. and then you went off in the service. Did you marry him before he went in the service? Or
I pinned his second lieutenant bars on in January of 1968, and he went off to pilot training in Lubbock, Texas, and then as soon as I got out of college, I mean, literally,
What branch was he in?
Air Force.
Air Force. Okay.
He was in pilot training. It was during the Vietnam War. They were, they needed pilots, and they
Right.
were getting them
What
in
did he
and
fly?
spitting
Did he
them
fly
out.
jets or?
Well, 5 weeks before he graduated, he had severe pericarditis, and they kept him there for about 6 more months because back then, if they didn't know what caused it,
What is that?
you couldn't fly. It's an inflammation of the sac around the heart,
Okay.
and apparently, what caused it was pulling G's, in jets.
Really?
He's never had trouble with it since. He can go, he's been a passenger on planes. He just couldn't pilot jets. And so by that time, they kept him 6 more months to be medically, to be sure that they couldn't get him back into pilot training to finish those 5 weeks. I think it was flying formations was the last thing. But so he went into communications, and it basically became IT, computers and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And it took us all over the world. It's just wonderful.
Well,
we never were separated.
I know you've traveled a lot. I hear you
Mm-hmm.
talking about a lot, and hit a couple of exotic places you've been.
Probably there are easily 2. One is the island of Yap.
Island of Yap.
It's a tiny little island. We went there in the early 70s. We were stationed in Guam, where the women still went topless. And we got invited to one of their fiestas on the most beautiful beach I've ever seen. And there were some missionary women working there, and they were dancing together, and they had on tops and grass skirts. And these people had on real grass skirts. And I think there must have been 30 women dancing together, like in couples, but like in long lines and with bamboo poles. And, it was like watching a Tarzan movie. It was just bizarre. Weird things just happened to me. We just got invited.
Well, what kind of military installation did they have that took you to Yap?
None. I had just read about it.
Oh, really?
When we were going to
Oh,
Guam.
well, you were traveling around from there.
And the other place is the Indonesian island of Bali. It was very,
heard of
very
that one, yeah.
different, and you see the rice paddies terraced, up the mountains, and you'll see people walking by with a stick with taking their ducks home, and you see caribou in the fields. And now this was, I have to say, I think a lot of it is still the same. We were there in the early 90s, and we went back. On the way back, we stopped in Java on the mainland of Indonesia, and we went to the temple of Borobudur. It's the largest largest Buddhist temple in the world. It's just the most amazing thing. And when we got there, you're standing there. It's like, imagine if there was like a pyramid, but built of different layers with a huge Buddha and these huge things that look like bells, but all made out of stone that just rises into the air. And there was a class there doing not yoga, but they were doing, making the things like the Alabama football players that got it from the movie. That they're doing moves, very fluid, almost like ballerinas, but like birds, and they all had on flowing white robes. And I just thought, I'm really glad we came here. I just loved it. And we loved Hawaii. I loved Hawaii so much. I set my book there, my novel. And
How long were you stationed in Hawaii?
3 years. Tom retired. We were in Germany. We had been in Germany 4 years. Tom had two assignments to Germany in the same general area, and he ended up at USAFE headquarters, which is the Air Force headquarters in all of Europe. But we loved Germany, too, very much. We loved the people. They were party people, and we were at the age where that was fun still. Mm-hmm. He got orders for the Pentagon. And he said, I'm not going to the Pentagon at this stage of my career.
This was up in the 90s here.
Yes, this was 95.
Okay.
And so our best friends had just left there. They had become friends while we were there. And he was a 2-star general who had just gotten to Hawaii. and he found that there was an opening for a colonel in communications at PACAF headquarters. And so he requested, they put in a by name request for Tom Latino to go to, most of Tom's assignments were that way. It would be somebody he had worked for, and they needed somebody that could fill a job maybe as an executive officer, or, communications maintenance, and they'd ask for Tom. And so we got lots of good
Now
assignments that way.
he was a full bird colonel.
He was.
Okay.
So I got to pin his butter bar lieutenant ranks on, and I got to pin one of his eagles on. His Air Force mentor from the time he was a lieutenant, we were stationed with in California, and they remain two of our dearest friends. I named the two characters in my novel, that the couple that lived in Hawaii, the Phillipsons, are named after that couple. And we were in San Antonio when he got his Eagle rank, and they were retired there. And we are still in close contact with one of their sons who is our age, and like family. I mean, you get a good mentor in the Air Force, it's like family, and you may be stationed. We have several friends that we were stationed with several times in several different places. And, we still get Christmas cards from all of them. And I guess they're going to get New Year's cards from me because I have not done my cards yet.
Well, that is a wonderful thing about military years. The Marine Corps, there were only, when I was in, less than 200,000 in the entire Marine Corps.
Yeah. You would meet somebody and you'd say, "Do you by any chance know another
Yeah,
Marine?" And
sometimes
usually they
wouldn't know.
would, yeah.
Yeah. And and like you said, you from time to time end up running into the same people coming and going. So it's kind of a real camaraderie.
Very much so.
My wife and I sometimes talk about in these senior years of ours how we don't get out as much as we used to. In fact, all of our friends, we don't have any friends. We just hang out here between the two of us. It's the only place
especially the
we
last
ever go.
couple of years.
The last couple of years. But I said, back in the military, you had a lot of young people, and everybody was from somewhere else. You didn't have to contend with, like, if somebody moves to the South, getting into the clique or whatever. Everybody was from somewhere else, and we all were raising our children, and we get together at our homes and have parties and play games and stuff like that, and have backyard barbecues with the kids all playing. It was a unique time, and really a fun time. Not that I ever really went to many exotic places. Vietnam wasn't that exotic. No. Camp Pendleton, California was okay, but I went to Hawaii, though. I was in Hawaii. In fact, I hated Hawaii so bad I volunteered for Vietnam just to get out of there.
You were stationed there?
Yeah.
And you hated it?
I hated. I wasn't a colonel. I was an E5 sergeant, and at Pearl Harbor Marine, what do they call it? Marine Barracks. A Marine barracks in the Marine Corps is a spit and polish outfit.
Yes.
It's almost like going back to boot camp. So you don't walk on the grass, and you better salute. When the band's playing, all of that, and it was just tough. It was a tough tour of duty. And so I volunteered for Vietnam, and they said, well, look, we just moved you over here, and you got to stay 3 years.
They've got to get their money's worth.
Got to get their money's worth. You got to stay 3 years. And so I put on my pity face and went before my commanding officer, and I said, look, I'm a career Marine. I've already re-enlisted, and this war is going to wind down here soon, and I don't have any battle ribbons. How can I be a career Marine without going to war? And you know what? He understood that. He said, now I understand you talking my language. Every Marine's got to have battle. And so he said, I'm going to tell you what I'll do. I'm going to send your letter in, but I'm going to recommend disapproval of it until you complete this tour. I said, well, I'll take whatever you give me. I had my orders within a week.
Oh, great.
They got mad with me.
Never met anybody that had volunteered for Vietnam.
Well, I wanted to go somewhere. I had never been anywhere. I went in the Marines and went through boot camp and infantry training and admin school in those days, and they sent me right back to Pensacola. I was in Pensacola for 3.5 years.
Goodness.
Great tour of duty. It was great. But I had never been anywhere, you know. So I guess Hawaii was the only exotic place I'd ever been. Camp Pendleton was probably my favorite. I loved California and Camp Pendleton.
Amen, Dwight. We're there several times. I think at least one of their children was born there.
It's a big sprawling base, and it kind of just felt like home. Everything is there that you need, and a great military camaraderie and family and everything. But now let's move back, because we'll shuffle off. I don't want to miss anything. Your military. What did you? How long was Tom in the military?
30 years.
30 years. Okay. What was it that you liked about your military years, and what did you not like?
I think it just I met people I would have never met. I saw real diversity for the first time. I think I know that some people in Atmore couldn't believe that I had married in their words, a Dago. I learned empathy for other people, and I'm not saying that didn't happen in Atmore, but when I was growing up, there was not a lot of opportunity to see anything other than what you went to school with, and we weren't integrated at that time.
That's right.
One thing that I did want to say today, when I was a lieutenant's wife in Lubbock, Texas, the other lieutenants' wives were very intimidated about going to things at the officers' wives' clubs. They didn't want to go to the luncheons. They didn't know what to wear. They didn't know, some of them, not all of them, but, a lot of them were just like I was, girls from Atmore, Alabama, or, Mississippi or Texas or Kansas, and some of them had never been out of their home states. I was very lucky that my parents thought travel was really important for their girls. So, but Atmore also had, if someone was getting married, let's say Miss Nell Staff, Jim Staff's mama, would have a party in their home, or a baby shower if somebody was having a baby, and the teenage girls various teenage girls would be invited to serve a lot. It might be punch you were serving, or with a little cake or whatever. So I wasn't intimidated by the older women. I had been around people like, you probably don't remember Doodle Long, but her husband owned the Ford dealership, the most gorgeous, sweet Southern woman. And
I remember that Long's Ford.
Just so many women that taught me.
You had some social skills at
I
an
did.
early age.
I had enough so that I was not an embarrassment to Tom, and I was not afraid. I was fearless. I mean, I look back and I think of the things that I did and the places I went, and Tom too. I mean, we landed one night in Puerto Vallarta, Mexico, at in the airfield that was far away from town, and got in the car with the first driver who came along at night. You wouldn't do that today, not unless you were crazy. But I loved London. We lived in London. Tom was the commander of the only American squadron at RAF Uxbridge, which is in West London, sort of near Heathrow. And the Queen's Color Squadron was stationed there. And our base was bombed by the IRA while we were there. In fact, I was in Atmore, and Tom was back here at the base. And it was challenging times in Greece when we lived in outside of Athens. I was nearly kidnapped the day before the United States bombed Libya by two men in a taxi situation, that the one in the back seat jumped out to grab me. And right before he opened the door, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I knew to run, and I screamed as loud as I could. So it wasn't all fun and travel, but Tom says that I was his tour, what do you call it when you pay somebody to be not your tour guide, but your tour? My mind is just drawing a blank, but I was his tour manager, because I would find these places that nobody ever heard of, and we would go, and wonderful things would happen.
Well, back when I was in high school, you could poll almost any senior class, poll the boys, and at least 90% of them, their plans were to go in the military. I mean, oh boy, I love that Marine uniform, or I love that Navy uniform. It was fairly shallow, but all the boys planned to go in the military. You could poll any high school class today, and you'd be hard pressed to find anybody. My wife and I were talking the other day, and she says, "Well, who's filling the ranks nowadays?" The most top-notch people. Back in my day, they drafted anything with a warm pulse, and they made them better men. I think the military did, but today I think our young men and women are top notch. I mean, they're cream of the crop that are going in the military. They don't take you if you've ever used any kind of drugs, or if you've ever been in trouble. They won't take you. And back in the day, I ran into guys. I was in Marine CID when I was in the service my last years, and I ran into guys all the time that I said, "How in the world did you ever get in the Marine Corps?" Well, the judge sentenced me to straighten me out. You know, I had already robbed a store. They sentenced me to the Marine Corps, but that doesn't happen today. Only the cream of the crop are in. So I think we can be very proud of our military men and women.
Do we have time for one quick story?
We do. We've got about 10 minutes.
Okay.
Just
there was
about 8 minutes.
A teacher that everybody who went to school in the 50s, 60s, and maybe into the early 70s was Miss Gertrude Edwards. She taught Latin, and she taught English. She taught senior English, or 11th grade English maybe. But she had a student whose name was Jerry Cruitt, and I interviewed him because he went on to be in the military and was a full colonel and did special ops. He was in charge of the coalition forces in Desert Storm 1 to rescue pilots that might have gone down that night. We were really lucky. Only one did. But I said, Jerry, when I was writing about him, I said, tell me what teachers influenced you the most? And he said, Ms. Edwards, because one day she told me, Jerry, you can be anything you want to be, because you're just that smart. And he said, I decided if Miss Edwards believed it, I must be smart. And I thought, again, just like you said about the great teachers we had, in the military, especially in the officer's rank, if your superior officer is writing your effectiveness report, if he's a poor writer, who gets hurt the most is the people that work for him.
That's right.
And Tom I think he had a teacher in Mississippi. He grew up in Pass Christian, Mississippi, where he was captain of the football team and quarterback. But I knew he had good teachers because he writes so well. I think he had the equivalent of Miss Hodnett, but in Pass Christian, Mississippi. And he said, I cannot believe how many junior officers can't write. He said, I did not realize that everybody doesn't write like I do or you do. And because it hurts the people that they're writing effectiveness reports on. So that really started me realizing we really had good teachers in Atmore and Walnut Hill.
I've observed the same thing. Writing has been a passion of mine as well, and I thought everybody could write, but everybody doesn't have that talent. Now, turn to math, you probably find me a numbskull too.
No, me too.
No. But talking about writing, I do want to hit. We've only got about 5 minutes left in the interview here, and I do want to touch on. And I think we're going to touch on something that we could take another hour with, but let's see if we can do it in 5 minutes.
Okay.
You continued to write. You wrote for Stars and Stripes, famous military
In Europe.
In Europe.
Europe. Went to Africa and also the Middle East, but they call it Europe.
Okay, and you wrote just what military type stories, or what did you write?
They had a
about?
Sunday magazine, and whatever the cover of that issue was going to be, whatever their main topic was that Sunday, they would call me maybe 2 weeks ahead of time and ask me to write my opinion of that topic.
Okay.
The very first one they asked me to do was when computers were, people were just starting to really use computers a lot, and they asked me to write, about computer dating and that sort of thing. But sometimes it was something more serious. And then I also did features like the 50th anniversary of the end of World War II happened while we were there. And I had a great story to tell that I had found. And so they sent a photographer out, and I did that. And then I did articles about places, travel things. I did that, travel articles and stuff like that for Military Times before I did Stars and Stripes. But it was sporadic. It was when I wanted to. I was freelancing, so I could do.
Well, I wonder if you had a similar experience that I've had. I've always loved to write stories and tell stories. My father was a prolific storyteller. And stories and editorial types were always fairly easy for me because I could just sit down and pop them out, and then I could go back and tweak them a little bit. But when I decided to write a novel, That was very hard for me because I'd never written anything that long. And, from military writing, report writing, that sort of thing, I was trained to be parsimonious with my words.
Yes.
Edit, cut back words and words. And when I started trying to stretch out and write a novel, I found that I had more room, and I had never done that before. So writing a novel was difficult for me. Now, I know you have a novel that you published a few years ago, and tell us a little bit about that.
It's called Your Gift to Me, and we've taken it off the market because I have not been well for the last, since 2017. And I just couldn't keep up with the marketing of it, and paying the taxes and all that kind of thing. So we took it off the market. It won 4 national. One was an international award. I told people it was Top Gun meets Steel Magnolias, but it really came out of when my father died of cancer, and the next day Olive Pate and Charlotte Boyle and several other women had a horrible car accident in Pensacola, and 2 of them were killed. One was my daddy's special lady friend, Olive Pate, and the other one was Linda Graves, and it threw me for a loop. I was like 40 years old, and it was too much grief to handle at one time. Linda Graves had been my Sunday school teacher for several years. Her first husband, Hal Graves, had been my Sunday school teacher for several years. And so my novel came out of deep grief. I said it in the military because that's what I know best. And I had some general officers who were fighter pilots who were very generous with sharing their information.
Now, you wrote that book after you came back to Atmore, didn't you?
I did.
Okay,
I started it in Hawaii, and I wrote it with a writer who, really a graphic designer, who I've never met. We've been friends for 25 years, and he had some grief issues, and we met in CompuServe Military Forum, if you remember back that long. And the man that owned the forum said, "You two write great together. Why don't y'all take over our humor board?" They called them billboards back then, not billboards, but boards, and see if you can make a go of it. And my co-author has a wild imagination, which is he's able to project in other characters, which is very important. But I know our time is...
Can you buy this book at Amazon or anywhere?
Sometimes it's on Amazon, but it's people and Amazon themselves who bought up a lot of the books. Okay. And people are selling them. I laughed. I saw a thing the other day. Somebody had one they were selling for $948. And Pam Middleton was offered that book, and she sent me the thing. But I'm not trying to sell my book. But the library does have it, and several people have checked it out. The library was very good to me when we published our novel. Okay.
Well, guess what?
We're out of time.
We're out of time. I told you this. Everybody who comes in here wonders, what are we going to talk about for an hour? And then we run out. But I have a lot more questions.
You just get loquacious people. We're not so much interesting as we are loquacious.
You are an easy interview because all I have to do is just shut up. And when you talk as much as I do, that's hard sometimes, just to shut up and let somebody else talk. But I appreciate you coming by and for the interview. And we're talking to Miss Bonnie Bartel Latino.
That's right.
She's an Atmorian and a lot of history. And we just kind of touched on a little bit of it about her, but she's a very interesting person. And I hope you all enjoyed our conversation. You. Okay. Thanks for coming, Bonnie.
Enjoyed it.
Thanks for listening to the Lloyd and Friends Show with Lloyd Overton.